On Rosh Hashanah, I addressed the spiritual response to despair in a post-October 7th world. That night, Rabbi Lana talked about why she loves and cares for Israel so deeply. Last night, Rabbi Lana spoke about finding faith to get through. These sermons will be accessible on our website. Take a listen. This morning, I'm going to take a closer look at Judaism in the post-October 7th world. This is a sermon that no rabbi wants to have to give. We will explore themes that might be too much for young children and uncomfortable for some of you. So this would be the time to step out if you feel you will need to. But remember that an adult needs to be with each child in the foyer, please. A little girl was diligently pounding away on her grandmother's old-style typewriter. When asked what she was doing, the girl told her grandmother, "I'm writing a story." The grandmother probed, "What's it about?" Typing away furiously, the girl replied, "I don't know. I can't read." Recently, I was at the keyboard, typing furiously the story of our people's lives and the lives of this world, but it kept getting muddled and murky. And I was wondering if I was misreading our situation. When it is increasingly difficult to read what's happening, I find myself regularly turning to Call Me Back, a podcast by Dan Senor, the author of Startup Nation. Call Me Back provides penetrating analyses and clarity on all things Israel and the Mideast. Recently, Senor asked his guest, Yossi Klein Halevi, a deep-thinking scholar from Jerusalem Shalom Hartman Institute, how he reads the post-October 7th world. Klein Halevi suggested that what happened on October 7th was that the Jewish world entered a new historical era, one which does not yet have a name. I would call it tentatively the end of the post-Holocaust era. I grew up, he said, in a post-Holocaust era, which was a time of seemingly limitless Jewish possibilities. Ever since the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in 70 CE, the Jewish people carried two dreams: the dream of returning home and the dream of finding a safe refuge. And the amazing thing that happened after the Holocaust is that both those dreams were fulfilled. To understand Klein Halevi's end of the post-Holocaust era, we need to first understand the post-Holocaust era itself. It began after World War II and the Nazi Holocaust, when the world, digesting that 6 million Jews were murdered, and 5 million others too, increasingly began to recognize its responsibility for allowing this genocide against Jews. As a result, world leaders strongly pushed back on anti-Semitism, attempting to stamp out that insidious hatred. They supported the rebirth of the State of Israel in the Jewish people's ancient homeland. They invited, even encouraged, the flowering of Jewish culture and scholarship on college campuses around the world. Among Jews, there was an omnipresent sense that having happened, a Holocaust could happen again. So we worked in conjunction with governments and in coalition with other religious organizations and other organizations to ensure that never again was more than just a slogan. On balance, the post-Holocaust era became a very hopeful period in which, Klein Halevi says, the atmosphere we all grew up in was basically, yeah, we Jews got sorus, we got problems. But the trajectory was towards a happily ever after ending of the story. But something has changed. shootings at synagogues, at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life in 2018, at the Chabad in Poway, California in 2019, the synagogue hostage situation in Colleyville, Texas in 222, harassing campus protests last year and this year, bomb threats in our synagogues in 2023 and 24 and before, those shook us to our core. The violence and the threat of future violence is forcing synagogues and Jewish organizations in what some are calling a new anti-Semitism tax to pay increasingly inordinate amounts of our budgets just to keep ourselves safe. If Israel's enemies could mutilate and murder, rape and kidnap, and within a week or less than a week, much of the world could dismiss it as fake news or the expected result of Israel's actions, while simultaneously spewing forth an unending flood of Jew hatred, then yeah, perhaps we have entered a new period, marking the end of the post-Holocaust era. Where once we had civic agreement to ban the kind of anti-Semitic hatred that led to the Holocaust, that agreement is now being broken. Scholar and author Dr. Dara Horn has been shining light on this reality. She tells this true story. People love the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam, which tells the story of a child who was hidden in a closet during the Holocaust and the family that hid her. Yet in 2018, a curious incident happened. A young Orthodox Jew who was an employee at that museum wanted to wear his yarmulke, and the museum refused. They made him hide it under a baseball cap. This in a museum that exists to educate people about a Jewish family forced into hiding. So he appealed the decision to the museum board, and after 4 months of deliberation, they finally permitted him to wear his yarmulke at work. Dr. Horn notes, 4 months is a very long time for the Anne Frank house to ponder whether or not it was a good idea to force a Jew into hiding. Dr. Horn also learned that in 2017, visitors noticed something inconsistent in the audio guide. There's those little handsets in the display where you choose a language for the audio tour. There's English, symbolized by the British flag, Francais by the French flag, and so on, until you get to Hebrew, Ivrit, Hebrew. No flag. No flag. The Israeli flag, the symbol of the national language of the people forced into hiding, was not an option. Did the forbidden yarmulke and the missing Israeli flag contradict a universal message that the museum aimed to teach? From this and other such incidents, Dr. Horn derives the title of her important book, People Love Dead Jews, and its thesis, that dead Jews have a very important place in the non-Jewish imagination, but living Jews, not so much. The horror of the Holocaust no longer motivates significant parts of the population to have special compassion for Jews or Israel. Think about that. Because it feels like everything that happened before doesn't necessarily help us address what needs to be done now. Some people may stand up and speak out, but many don't, or don't believe, or simply don't care. The world is moving on beyond the guilt brought on by the Shoah. There's now an internet adage called Godwin's rule. Maybe you've heard of it. It asserts that as an online discussion grows longer, the probability of a comparison involving Nazis or Hitler approaches 1. That means that the Holocaust is becoming an historical oddity, an anti-Semitism, an inconvenience, such that comments like, gas them, Hitler was right, finish the job, appear so frequently on social media, in teen group chats, in chants like at the 2017 Charlottesville, Virginia protest, Jews will not replace us, and on signs carried during pro-Palestinian college campus protests. Now, when elected officials use anti-Semitic tropes, they apologize and do it again. The condemnation of their words takes far too long, and the leaders remain in power. When Adidas, a Nazi-era shoe company that made its millions off of Jewish wartime slave labor, heard the heinous hatred of its top celebrity endorser, it took far too long to respond. And when known anti-Semites spew forth their hatred, they are still invited to lunch with those in the halls of power. Now, Bret Stephens, a journalist formerly of the Wall Street Journal and now the New York Times, refers to this as, quote, the year American Jews woke up. He calls all of us October 8th Jews, those who woke up a day after the greatest tragedy since the Holocaust to see how little empathy there was for us in the world. He says, as a result, we now ought to embrace three realizations. First, that American Jews should not expect reciprocity from those we align with. In an era that stresses sensitivity to every microaggression against nearly any minority, macroaggressions against Jews who happen to believe that Israel has a right to exist are not only permitted, but demanded. Second, that Zionist has become just another word for Jew. When they condemn Zionism, far too many of them are actually condemning Jews as well. Anti-Zionists may deny this strenuously because a vocal handful of Jews are also anti-Zionist, and because they'd often like to believe that their objection is to a political ideology rather than to a people or a religion. Yet in practice, the distinctions between anti-Zionist and anti-Semite blur to the point of invisibility. And third, this isn't going to end anytime soon, because anti-Zionism has a self-righteous fervor that will attract followers and inspires militancy, and because most of us Jews will not forsake what it means to be Jewish so that we may be more acceptable to those who despise us. Anti-Semitism is a shape-shifting virus which has persisted over centuries and across cultures and political systems because it is able to attach itself to the reigning convictions of the day, like it is doing just now. We Jews and our allies are struggling to discern effective responses. And all the experts agree that there are no easy solutions in this period of virulent anti-Semitism and widespread Israel hate. We are quite literally writing new chapters while this story is playing out. Thankfully, some of Orami's congregants, with our encouragement, have been taking profound steps that might bear fruit. Like our congregants, Brian Cohen and David Brooks and others, who refused to stay silent as Jewish college students were blocked from attending classes, when Hillels were blamed and protested because Jews were the problem, and when professors gave assignments with one-sided interpretations, placing blame solely on the shoulders of Israel. What can you do? Write and call the college administrators at your alma mater and your children's schools. Be respectful, but refuse to back down. And be like Orami's longtime board member and officer Karen Pofsky, who argued that we Jews need to learn again how to better advocate and adjudicate. Thus, she worked with the Louis Brandeis Center for Human Rights, which filed an Office of Civil Rights complaint to compel her child's college campus to fulfill its mission of educating the next generations of Jews while simultaneously protecting them. All of them. Our Jewish kids, too. Karen is also leading a Jewish parents group that has bi-weekly meetings with the administration to advocate for our kids and help change school policy. What can you do? Contact the Brandeis Law Center and join in these fights. And we need to redouble our efforts to teach in corporations and organizations that when we protect people from hate, that necessarily must include Jewish people too. Thus, ORAMI board member April Powers, once the recipient of virulent anti-Semitism and death threats, multiple death threats, for trying to help her company respond to the violent anti-Semitism that spread after the last Hamas conflict in 2021, just like it responded to every other hate crimes that year. She turned around and took her skills to Project Shema, where her team teaches corporations and governments, agencies, schools, and community organizations how to respond to anti-Semitism as another heinous form of hatred. What can you do? Engage Project Shema to educate your company or organization's leadership and your colleagues. And be like ORAMI board member Erin Mayer, who, when disturbed by the coverage of the aftermath of October 7th massacre, actively sought out local station leadership, assembled other congregants to join her on Zoom, and educated the media station's staff about the problems, helping move the reporting back a little bit towards balance. What can you do? When you hear news that is unfair or unbalanced, speak up and point it out, role modeling for others how to speak out too. And be like Congregant Ben Ginsberg, Communications Director at Newground, an innovative center for Muslim-Jewish dialogue, who teaches that we must grieve our own, and we must grieve Palestinians who died by the tens of thousands and suffered by the hundreds of thousands this year. What can we do? Assert that we Jews have plenty of space to see each other as twin sacred souls seeking solace and support, the children of Isaac and the children of Ishmael, both the children of Abraham. Then go to Newground's website and join the conversation. And be like congregants Todd and Heather Lieberman, producer and marketing executive of the newly released movie Whitebird, starring Helen Mirren. They brought to the screen a heartwarming and powerful story set in the Holocaust. It was selected by the Shoah Foundation as their new teaching tool to illuminate that dark period, because Whitebird shines the light on the Holocaust, but it's also a great story on the importance of kindness in the midst of dark times. What can you do? Go see Whitebird this week and urge family and friends all over the country to do the same soon. Let's boost the distribution of an important teaching tool about the Holocaust. It's a good movie. Go see it. We now need to learn about Judaism differently. You know, being a mensch, the desire of most Jewish parents for their children, and the motivating theme for many synagogue education programs is admirable, but no longer enough. We need to teach more about the history, community, theology of Judaism so that our students and their families have the essential knowledge to go along with the good feelings, so that when confronted with hate or heinous misconceptions, they will know enough about the essential goodness and history of Judaism to remain focused and connected. Here at Congregation ORAMI, Rabbi Lana Zilberman-Soloway, Andrew Fromer, Brooke Bott-Widnick, and their faculty are doing just that. What can you do? Bring yourself and help bring more young Jews and teens and adults into learning the essential aspects of Judaism. We all need to broaden our education, especially about Israel, forswearing simple answers that make it into cable news or even into whatever your favorite prominent pro-Israel organization's email is. And TikTok, X, and Instagram only reduce complex issues to memes minus nuance. What can you do? Get your information from reputable sources like the timesofisrael.com, I-24 News, and Dan Center's Call Me Back podcast. And we need to lean back into those historic organizations built to defend us: American Jewish Committee, Anti-Defamation League, the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, and others, each working on a corner of the conundrum to call out anti-Semitism and anti-Israel hatred, and to collaborate with appropriate authorities and local leaders to take actions which protect all of us, while still holding closely to their missions of fighting hatred against anyone else, others too. Because history has shown us that time and again, we Jews thrive continuously only when we are within tolerant societies. The information and contacts for all these projects and organizations are on ORAMI's website, orami.org. Check them out and get to work. And we must support our synagogues. Synagogues like Congregation ORAMI are the legacy communities that provide lifelong learning, comfort, a safe haven, and sturdy foundation for our people to live in a world that has tired of Holocaust references and Israel's self-defense. Synagogues bring generations together to guide our youth, to engage our neighbors, to protect ourselves and our souls. Synagogues play a foundational role as safe and vibrant hubs of our Jewish community. Now is the time to support and deepen your support, to participate, to congregate, to collaborate as we lean into a proud, personal, public, joyous Judaism. Come home to Judaism. Come home to Congregation ORAMI. And if you live at a distance, then become a member of ORAMI's neighborhood, as we now have congregants, new congregants from all over, from New York and Texas and Arizona and Colorado and Florida and Nevada and Wisconsin and Kansas and all throughout Northern and Southern California. In short, it's time we open our eyes to the new reality that as the world turns, our Jewish place in it is turning too. Our people's long-term survival will not be guaranteed by assimilating like our non-Jewish neighbors. To thrive and survive, we need to pour ourselves back into Judaism and the Jewish world, into Israel and to understanding. We must live a joyous Judaism that embraces our values with eyes open to reality, that we have come to the end of the post-Holocaust era. We must learn more deeply about our history and holiness, about Mount Sinai and the sacred, about Israel, how it came to be, why it came to be, the length and depth of the history of the conflict. And we must learn about how we are responsible for our extended Jewish family. We no longer have the luxury of making Judaism our avocation. It must return to a central place in our lives. We must be resolute in our minds and in our kishkis, our insides, that our right to exist, to celebrate, and to be Jews is non-negotiable and may not be denied. Congregation ORAMI will continue to be lamplighters lighting the way. So let's inspire, encourage, and motivate one another to face down that anti-Semitism, that Israel hatred with courage and conviction. Because nothing less than the survival of Jews and Judaism and Israel is at stake. So let's do this together. Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you.